They called it the dawn of Ionis. Prometheus Corp hadn't just launched a new product. They'd rewritten humanity's contract with time itself. Ionis was a miracle in a small, pearlescent pill. It seeped into American life like water into sand. First, it was marketed as an elite anti-aging treatment for the rich and famous. Then it appeared in pharmacies as a prescription drug. And then, inevitably, it became part of everything. Ionis Forte in your morning Starbucks, Ionis Hydrate in your bottle of Dasani, Ionis Vita in your breakfast cereal. The world around me was growing younger before my eyes. My parents, who just a year ago were complaining about joint pain, were now sending me pictures from their hike along the Appalachian Trail. My colleagues at the office glowed with a vibrant health and unnaturally smooth skin. They spoke of Ionis with a kind of religious reverence, discussing dosages and new enhanced formulas as if they were talking about vintage wine. And me? I was a heretic in this new church of eternal youth. My name is Alex. I'm the guy who reads the fine print, the one who prefers organic food and believes that if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I didn't see Ionis as a panacea, but as the greatest human experiment in history, with consequences unknown. My project partner, Sarah, found my stubbornness amusing. She was smart, witty, and of course a devout Ionis user. Her hair shone even under the merciless fluorescent lights of our 15th floor office in the heart of Chicago. "Alex, seriously," she'd say, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against her latte cup, which sported the Ionis Forte logo. "You're going to be the only one to actually reach retirement age in our eternally 25 office. You'll be sitting here gray and wrinkled, while the rest of us are running around like elves. Someone's got to remember what real people look like," I'd reply, taking a sip of my bitter black espresso from the office machine, into which I defiantly loaded my own beans. Last week, corporate leadership announced a new milestone. Our Chicago office, as the headquarters, would be the first to transition to an exclusive, fortified batch of Ionis. It was integrated directly into the building's water supply and the coffee machines on every floor. "A pilot program for increased productivity," the memo read. Everyone was ecstatic. I just started bringing in my own water, too. That mistrust, that habit of going against the current, saved my life, and condemned me to a hell I could never have imagined. Because when Prometheus's miracle finally revealed its side effect, I had a front row seat. It was noon. The sun blasted through the panoramic windows of our office, flooding the rows of desks where the brightest minds of Prometheus Corp sat. I was at the coffee machine, pouring my second espresso. The air hummed with the usual office chatter, the clatter of keyboards, quiet conversations, ringing phones. A normal Tuesday. And then the sound began. It wasn't a scream or a moan. It was something deeper, more visceral, like 100 violin strings snapping at once inside a person's soul. The sound started with one person, Kevin from accounting, and spread like a wave across the entire floor. People froze, clutching their heads, their fingers curling into claws. Their eyes widened with an unspeakable terror and pain. Then came the cracking, not one crack, but dozens. A loud, wet crunch of breaking bone. Spines arched at impossible angles, vertebrae jutting through the expensive fabric of their shirts. Skin stretched taut, then tore, unleashing not blood, but something dark, almost black. Expensive Hugo Boss suits and Ann Taylor dresses ripped at the seams, unable to contain the rapidly changing bodies within. I stood frozen, the cup slipping from my hand and shattering on the floor. My brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The smell, the air filled with the scent of ozone, like after a lightning strike. and something else, wild, musky, the scent of a predator. In 30 seconds, our office, a model of corporate success, had become a pen for monsters. Where the good-natured Kevin had sat, a 7-foot-tall creature now stood on 2 legs, covered in coarse, dark fur. Its fingers had elongated into long, black talons, and its face had stretched into a bestial snout, saliva dripping from its fangs. But the worst part was the eyes. They burned with a yellow animal fire, devoid of any human spark. And there were dozens of them now, just like him. They snarled, turning on each other, their movements sharp and predatory. I backed away, my spine hitting the wall of the server room. The door was ajar. I slipped inside, into the cool darkness, and saw Sarah. She was on the floor, her hand clamped over her mouth, her body racked with tremors. Her eyes held the same terror as mine, her allergies. They had saved her. But our small corner of safety didn't last long. The snarling outside subsided, replaced by a single dominant sound. It was a low, guttural roar, full of authority. Through the server room's glass wall, we saw the creature's part. Marcus Vance, our ambitious vice president, had always boasted about taking a double dose of Ionis for maximum efficiency. Now that efficiency was on full display. He was almost 9 feet tall, as massive as a grizzly but with a wolf's grace. His fur was black as pitch, and his yellow eyes, unlike the others, held a cold, calculating intelligence. He was the Alpha. He slowly turned his enormous head and looked directly at us. He saw us. He knew we were different. Not prey. A mistake. An imperfection that needed to be exterminated. With a deafening crack, he slammed a clawed fist against the server room glass. A web of fractures spread across its surface, but it held. He hit it again. "We have to run," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Where?" The Alpha stepped back, and we understood his plan. He wasn't going to break his way in. He was going to flush us out. One of the creatures, formerly his secretary, began smashing her head against the fire alarm panel under his unwavering gaze until she shattered the glass and pulled the lever. Sirens blared and water began to pour from the ceiling sprinklers. But that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was that Marcus was hurting us. He and 2 others began moving slowly toward us, cutting us off from the server room door, forcing us along the glass wall toward the huge panoramic window in the corner of the office. He wasn't rushing. He was savoring every second of our terror. Our backs hit the cold glass. The 15th floor, nothing but air below. Sarah looked around in a panic, and her eyes locked on a large red button on the wall next to the window. "Facade maintenance," the label read, the kind the window washers used. Without thinking, she slammed her palm against it. There was a hiss of pneumatics, and the massive glass panel shifted slightly, opening a gap of a few inches. The safety lock was broken. The Alpha let out a triumphant roar and took a step toward us. And in that moment, my survival instinct overrode the paralyzing fear. Next to me stood the heavy office water cooler, the 5-gallon jug I'd brought up for myself. It had to weigh at least 150 pounds. I didn't think. I just acted. With a scream of rage and desperation, I gripped it and heaved it with all my might into the monster's chest. He wasn't expecting it. The impact hit him just as he was shifting his weight. He stumbled backward, losing his balance. His back slammed into the weakened glass panel. There was a deafening crack, like a gunshot. The window exploded into 1,000 glittering shards. The Alpha let out a furious, surprised howl that was cut short as his massive body vanished into the opening. For a second, silence reigned. The other creatures froze, staring at the empty space. That second was all we had. I grabbed Sarah's hand and we bolted, diving into a vacant office down the hall. I slammed the heavy oak door shut and turned the lock. Outside, a new howl rose up, full of not rage but grief and command. The building was descending into a blood-soaked chaos, and we were trapped on the 15th floor of hell. 2 days, 48 hours that stretched into an eternity. Our world became Marcus's office, 300 square feet of luxury that had become our prison. The heavy oak door and its solid lock were the only things separating us from the pack. The first few hours were the worst. We sat on the floor in the far corner, huddled together, and just listened. We listened to the sounds of a new world being born outside our door. It was a cacophony of snarls, shrieks, the sound of tearing flesh, and the thud of bodies hitting walls. They were fighting, establishing a new hierarchy after the fall of their alpha. Occasionally, one of them would approach our door, scratching at the wood with its claws, sniffing the air with a low, hungry growl. In those moments, my heart would plummet, and Sarah would cry silently, her fingers digging into my arm. By the first night, the sounds became quieter, more organized. Chaos had been replaced by order. We could hear them patrolling the hallway, their heavy footfalls and the scrape of their claws on the marble floor. Our salvation came in the small things we'd once taken for granted. The building's emergency generator was still running, powering the AC, and most importantly, the server room. And the server room, it turned out, had a small maintenance bathroom for the tech crew. A tiny, windowless room, but it had a toilet and a sink. Water. It was life. Food came from the vending machine that Sarah and I, trembling with fear, had dragged out of the hallway during a brief lull between patrols. A few bags of chips, chocolate bars, and nuts. We rationed them meticulously. Our phones, our only potential windows to the outside world, we kept in power-saving mode, charging them one at a time from laptops that still had some juice. On the second day, I dared to look out the window. I crawled to it, keeping low, and peered cautiously down. The Chicago I knew was gone. The streets were choked with abandoned cars and shattered storefronts. Here and there, I could see fires burning. But there were no people. Not a single one. Instead, there were them. They moved in packs, swift, graceful, and purposeful. They were hunting. I watched 3 of them run down a deer that had somehow wandered into the city center, tearing it apart with terrifying efficiency. They weren't mindless monsters. They were perfect predators. I crawled back from the window, shaking. "What's out there?" Sarah whispered. She was sitting with her arms wrapped around her knees, her face pale and gaunt. "Nothing good," I answered honestly. "The city's theirs now." My thoughts raced like panicked birds in a cage. What had happened to the rest of the world? Was this new, fortified batch of Ionis the only cause? Or was it just a catalyst, and the whole world was now burning in the same fire? Useless questions. Our immediate problem was that our bottled water was running out, and Snickers bars couldn't sustain us forever. "We have to do something, Alex," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. "We can't sit here forever. Sooner or later they'll break down the door. Or we'll starve." She was right. Staying here was a delayed death sentence. "I have an idea," I said, my own voice sounding foreign to me. "The fire escape. It's on the other side of the floor. If we can get to it without being seen..." "Get to it." Horror flashed in her eyes. "Past them?" "At night. They seem less active when the sun's down. Maybe they rest or... I don't know. But it's our only shot." Downstairs, across the street, there's a 24-hour convenience store. If we can get there, we could stock up on enough food and water to last a long time. The plan was insane, suicidal. But the alternative was to slowly fade away in this gilded tomb. We prepared until sunset. Our weapons were the legs of a heavy armchair from Marcus's office. I broke off 2 of them. They were solid oak, about 3 feet long with a heavy base. Not swords, but better than nothing. We filled every empty bottle with water from the server room cooler. When the last rays of sun vanished behind the skyline and the city plunged into a darkness broken only by the light of distant fires, we were ready. I opened the door a crack. The hallway was empty and silent. The silence was more terrifying than the snarling. "It's now or never," I whispered. "Move quietly, and don't look back." Sarah nodded, her face set with determination, though I could see the tremor in her hands as she gripped her makeshift club. We slipped into the hallway. Every footstep echoed like a gunshot in my head. The marble floor was stained with dark, dried patches. The musky scent still hung in the air. We passed rows of empty offices, their glass walls spattered with blood. In one, I saw a silhouette slumped under a desk. It didn't move. I didn't look closer. The fire escape door was at the end of the hall. 50 yards that felt like a marathon. We were halfway there when one of them came around the corner. It hadn't seen us, moving slowly, sniffing the air. We froze in the shadow of a doorway, barely breathing. It passed by, just 10 feet from us. I could see its nostrils twitching, its ears swiveling to catch every sound. When it disappeared around the bend, we dashed for the door. I pushed the bar. Locked. Damn it. "In here," Sarah hissed, pointing to an adjacent office. We ducked inside. It was a manager's office with a small balcony used for smoke breaks. And from the balcony we could climb over to the fire escape landing. We stepped out into the cold night air. The wind howled between the skyscrapers. Climbing over the railing and jumping the 3 feet to the metal platform was risky, but we had no choice. I helped Sarah over, then followed. We began our descent, 15 floors down into a city that belonged to monsters. Every creak of the metal steps sounded like a gunshot. We were descending into darkness, into the unknown. Our only hope, a small convenience store on the other side of the street. The screech of metal on concrete echoed in the night's silence as we descended the fire escape. Every step was a risk, every sound a potential death sentence. The cold Chicago wind cut to the bone, whistling between skyscrapers that now looked like giant tombstones. Below, the street was a graveyard of cars. Smashed headlights stared into the void like blinded eyes. Reaching the ground, we paused for a second in the building's shadow. The air was thick with the smell of dust, soot, and something else. A sweetish, cloying scent of decay I tried not to analyze. "The store is right across the street," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling from cold and fear. 50 yards, maybe less. 50 yards of open space, watched by 1,000 dark windows. It felt like a mile. "On 3, I said, gripping my oak club so hard my knuckles turned white. "We run as fast as we can. Don't stop no matter what." She nodded. 1, 2, 3. We sprinted across the street. The sound of our feet on the asphalt seemed deafening. I expected a pack to burst from every alley, from behind every car. But nothing happened. We reached the glass door of the 7-Eleven and ducked inside. The door's bell let out a cheerful, inappropriate jingle that made us both jump. Inside it was chaos. Shelves were overturned, merchandise scattered across a floor that crunched underfoot with broken glass and spilled chips. but it was quiet. Too quiet. "You get water. I'll get food," I commanded in a whisper. "Only take things in sealed packages. Canned goods, protein bars, anything we don't have to cook." We split up, trying to make as little noise as possible. I swept cans of tuna, beans, and soup into a backpack. Sarah gathered protein bars and nuts. My senses were cranked to 11. Every rustle made me freeze. Every distant howl from the street made me duck my head. That's when I heard it. A soft, intermittent sound, like a sob. I froze, listening. The sound came again. It was coming from behind the cashier's counter. I moved slowly toward the sound, my club raised. I rounded the counter. There, huddled in a large cardboard box that once held potato chips, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. She wore a pink coat, now thoroughly smudged, and jeans. She was hugging her knees, crying silently, trying to stifle any noise. Her small body shook with soundless sobs. My heart seized. All my survival instincts, all my paranoia receded for a moment. I slowly knelt. "Hey," I whispered, as gently as I could. "It's okay. We're not going to hurt you." The girl looked up at me. Her eyes were huge, brown, and filled with a kind of horror no child should ever have to witness. Pinned to her coat was a name tag, the kind they give out on school field trips. It read, "Lily." She didn't answer. She just stared at me, her gaze holding no trust, only animal fear. Sarah came over. Seeing the girl, she gasped and pressed a hand to her mouth. She knelt beside me. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her voice filled with a tenderness I'd never heard from her. "My name is Sarah, and this is Alex. We're hiding too. Are you here all by yourself?" Lily nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving ours. Tears continued to roll down her cheeks. "Where are your parents?" Sarah asked. The girl's face contorted with a fresh wave of pain, and she buried her face in her knees again. The answer was obvious. They had become one of them. This tiny, terrified child had seen it all. A crushing weight of responsibility settled on me. This wasn't just a supply run anymore. It was a rescue mission. We couldn't leave her here. Thoughts of how we would survive as a trio, how we would feed and protect a child in this hell, flashed through my mind. But I pushed them away. Some things you just have to do. "Lily," I said, trying to make my voice sound confident. "We have to leave. It's not safe here. Will you come with us? We promise. We'll take care of you." She hesitated, her gaze shifting between me and Sarah. Maybe she saw something in Sarah's face that sparked a flicker of trust. She slowly, so slowly, held out a tiny hand. Sarah took it gently. "That's a good girl. Everything's going to be okay." I wasn't so sure. I wasn't sure of anything. But now we had a reason to fight for more than just ourselves. We stood up. I shouldered the backpack, heavy with cans. Sarah held Lily's hand. There were 3 of us now, and we had to cross that damn street again. We approached the door. I peeked cautiously outside. The street was still empty. "Looks clear," I whispered. And at that exact moment, a low, guttural howl erupted from outside, so close it froze the blood in my veins. The howl made us recoil from the door, freezing us in place. It wasn't just loud, it was close. Too close. It was answered by a second, then a third. They were communicating. "Back now," I hissed, pulling Sarah and Lily deeper into the store. We ducked behind a tall liquor shelf, crouching down. The rows of whiskey, gin, and vodka bottles offered a fragile sanctuary. I peered carefully through a gap between 2 bottles of bourbon. 3 of them emerged from a dark alley onto the street. They moved on 2 legs, but their posture was bestial, hunched, tense. Their long limbs ended in claws that scraped against the asphalt. They stopped directly in front of the store's entrance. They weren't looking inside. They were scenting the air. Their heads, with their elongated snouts, swiveled from side to side, nostrils flaring. They had smelled us. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I glanced at Sarah. She was clutching Lily, her hand clamped over the little girl's mouth. Lily's eyes were wide with terror, but she made no sound. She had already learned how to survive. One of them, the largest, pushed open the glass door. The bell chimed its idiotic little tune again. The monster stepped inside. The other two followed. They weren't searching with their eyes. They were following a scent. They moved slowly, methodically, their heavy breathing audible in the dead silence of the store. A low growl vibrated in their chests. The smell of ozone and wet fur hit me. They moved past the chip aisle, past the soda coolers, heading directly for us. One of them stopped at our shelf. It was so close I could see details my brain desperately tried to reject. A yellow pupil-less eye, droplets of saliva dripping from black gums onto its fangs, a long forked tongue that licked its snout. It inhaled so loudly it sounded like a vacuum cleaner. It knew we were here. Behind this thin wall of glass and liquor, I knew we had seconds, maybe less. It raised a clawed hand, preparing to smash the shelf apart. Panic and adrenaline gave birth to a desperate, insane plan in my mind. I glanced around. On a nearby shelf were bottles of red wine. Slowly, trying not to make a sound, I reached out and took one. It was heavy, made of thick glass. The monster snarled, gathering itself to strike. In that instant, throwing with all my fear and desperation, I hurled the bottle over the top of the shelf to the far end of the store. It flew in an arc and shattered with a tremendous crash against the tile floor of the cleaning supplies aisle. All three creatures spun toward the sound. Loud, sharp, it had broken their hunter's focus. They forgot the scent. They charged toward the noise like dogs after a thrown stick. There was a crash as they knocked over a display of bleach. "Now," I whispered. We scrambled out from behind the shelf and bolted for the exit. I didn't look back. I could hear the furious roars behind us as they realized they'd been tricked. But we had a few precious seconds head start. We burst out onto the street. I scooped Lily up into my arms because her small legs couldn't possibly run fast enough. We raced back toward our skyscraper, not caring about the path, leaping over abandoned bags and trash. I expected a pursuit, but none came. Maybe the spilled bleach had masked our scent, or maybe they were too busy destroying the store. We slipped through the side door we'd exited from and slammed it shut behind us. Leaning against the cold wall, we gasped for breath. My lungs were on fire. My heart felt like it would explode. I set Lily down. She immediately clung to Sarah's leg. We had done it. We had survived. We climbed back up to our office sanctuary carrying our precious supplies. I barricaded the door with everything I could move. A desk, chairs, a heavy filing cabinet. Only then did I allow myself to exhale. "We're okay," I said, more to myself than to them. "We're okay." Sarah sat on the floor hugging Lily, rocking her gently. The girl wasn't crying anymore. She was just staring into space. I opened a can of peaches and offered it to her. She looked at it, then at me, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes besides fear. She took the can and slowly ate a slice. It was a small victory, a tiny island of normalcy in a sea of madness. That night, while Sarah and Lily slept, I sat by the window, staring out at the dead city. I knew that every supply run would be like this, Every time, we'd be risking it all. We couldn't keep playing this game of Russian roulette. We needed a different plan. We needed hope. And as if in answer to my thoughts, Sarah's phone, which she'd left charging on the desk, let out a soft, quiet beep. On its screen, a single notification glowed in the darkness. That soft, electronic chime, in the dead silence of our sanctuary, was louder than a gunshot. Sarah and I both shot up. Lily, asleep on her lap, mumbled something in her sleep. I crept to the desk where the phone lay. The screen was bright. It was an emergency broadcast, the kind they sent out during hurricanes or tornadoes. I never thought I'd see one in a situation like this. I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking slightly. The screen displayed a short message in all caps, FEMA alert, all survivors. Evacuation point established. Rooftop Meridian Tower, 23:59 local time. Military support on site. Do not be late. Message repeats. I read it aloud in a whisper. Then again. Meridian Tower? Sarah breathed, her eyes wide. That's 10 blocks from here. 11:59 p.m., I added, looking at the time on the screen. That's tonight. We have less than 6 hours. Hope. That was the first thing I felt. Pure, irrational, intoxicating hope. We hadn't been abandoned. Someone out there was still fighting. They had helicopters, a plan, a way out. But the hope was immediately followed by an icy wave of skepticism. My old habit. How do we know it's real? I asked, turning to Sarah. The networks are down. How could they send this? Old emergency broadcast systems, she suggested, her analyst's brain kicking in even now. They use low-frequency channels that can operate even when the main towers are damaged. And if the military has a mobile command center. Or it's a trap, I cut in. Imagine it. You're a smart monster. How do you gather all the remaining survivors in one place? You send them a message about a rescue. Sarah looked at me, and I saw the spark of hope in her eyes dim. Alex, I'm just saying we have to be careful. Just then, Lily woke up. She sat up and rubbed her eyes. She had heard us talking. My brother told me to wait for help, she said. They were the first full sentences we'd heard from her. Her voice was thin, barely a whisper. Sarah and I exchanged a look. Your brother, sweetie? Sarah asked gently, moving closer to her. Lily nodded. When it started, we were at the store. He worked there. He locked me in the back room. He told me to be quiet and not to come out. He said soldiers would come in helicopters and save everyone. Then he ran outside and started screaming to make them chase him instead of coming into the store. She said it in a flat, almost emotionless voice, as if retelling someone else's story. Tears began to stream down her cheeks again, but she didn't seem to notice. Her big brother had sacrificed himself to save her. He had lured the monsters away, and he had believed that help would come. I felt a lump form in my throat. My cynicism and paranoia felt petty and selfish in the face of that boy's sacrifice and this little girl's faith. He was right, I said, looking Lily straight in the eye. Help is on the way, and we're going to get to it. I looked at Sarah. She nodded, a new determination on her face. 10 blocks, she said, through a city full of those things. How? Not on the streets, I answered, my brain already working on the logistics. Underground, service tunnels, the subway. Something has to connect. We need to find a map of the city's infrastructure. Marcus's office has to have access to the building plans. We spent the next hour preparing. We found detailed blueprints of our skyscraper on Marcus's computer. They showed an access point to an underground system of maintenance tunnels that connected several major buildings in the area, including an old subway line. That was our path. We gathered everything we could carry. Food, water, flashlights we'd found in a desk drawer, spare batteries. I found a heavy crowbar in a supply closet. It was better than the oak chair leg. We stood at the barricaded door, ready to step back out into the world that wanted to devour us. "Ready?" I asked. Sarah took Lily's hand. "Ready?" Lily looked up at me, and for the first time she gave a faint, weak smile. We dismantled the barricade and stepped into the dark hallway. This time we weren't just going on a supply run. We were going to our salvation, or our deaths. Either way, we weren't going to hide anymore. The countdown had begun. The underground tunnels were like the veins of a dead city, narrow, concrete, with bundles of wires hanging from the ceiling like desiccated vines. The air was stale, smelling of damp earth, rust, and ozone. The only sounds breaking the silence were the drip of water somewhere in the darkness and our own heavy breathing. Our flashlight beams cut short sections out of the gloom, turning everything else into an abyss of black. We'd been walking for over an hour, checking the printout of the plan I'd grabbed. Lily held Sarah's hand and didn't say a word, but her resilience was astounding. She didn't cry or complain. According to the plan, we were supposed to emerge in the sub-basement of the old public library. From there, it was only 3 blocks on the surface to Meridian Tower, the most dangerous part of the journey. We found the right door, heavy steel with library, maintenance access stenciled on it. I listened. Not a sound from the other side. I slowly turned the wheel handle. The door groaned open. We found ourselves in a vast, echoing basement, filled with shelves of archival documents. And there was light. Dim from a few emergency lamps, but it was light. And then we heard the voice. "Don't move! Hands up!" A man stepped out from behind a shelving unit. He was tall, well-built, with a crew cut and steel in his eyes. He held a pump-action shotgun aimed right at me. Others emerged behind him. I counted about a dozen people in all. Men, women of varying ages. Their faces were haggard, but their eyes burned with resolve. "We mean you no harm," I said, slowly raising my hands. Sarah did the same. The man with the shotgun scanned us, his gaze lingering on Lily. His expression softened slightly. "Who are you? Where did you come from?" he demanded, not lowering his weapon. "My name's Alex. This is Sarah and Lily. We came from the Prometheus building on Wacker Drive. We're heading to Meridian Tower." At the mention of Meridian Tower, a murmur went through the group. "You got the message too?" the man asked. I nodded. "Yeah, the FEMA alert." The man lowered the shotgun. "Name's Jackson, ex-Marine. We've been holding out here since day one." He introduced us to his group. They were a mixed bag, a doctor, a couple of college kids, an elderly woman who'd been a librarian here. And there was one guy who immediately caught my attention. His name was Paul. He was a programmer, thin, with shifty eyes and a nervous smile. He kept to himself, constantly fidgeting with the sleeves of his hoodie. "You got here just in time," Jackson said, leading us to their camp. A small reading room barricaded with tables and bookshelves. We were just debating the best way to break for the tower. More numbers, better odds. The atmosphere in the group was tense. These weren't friends. They were desperate strangers thrown together by catastrophe. Paranoia was thick in the air. Everyone was sizing everyone else up, trying to figure out who was a strong link and who was a weak one. They gave us hot soup from a can, heated on a camping stove. It was the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted. Lily opened up a little, even talking to the old librarian. I spoke with Jackson. He was a natural leader, calm, rational, inspiring confidence. "We've seen them," he said, nodding toward the barricaded windows. "They've changed, gotten smarter. They patrol, herd their prey. They're not just monsters. They're a pack." As we discussed the plan, I couldn't shake a strange feeling watching Paul. He sat in a corner, his face unnaturally pale, sweat beading on his forehead even though it was cool in the basement. "You okay?" I asked, walking over to him. Yeah, fine," he said too quickly, not looking at me. "Just tired. Nerves." Jackson gathered everyone for a final briefing. "All right, here's the plan. We move out the main entrance in 20 minutes. We stick together, tight formation. The first 3 blocks are the kill zone. Our objective is the lobby of the Meridian. We can hold out there until the military arrives. Everyone clear?" Everyone nodded silently. I pulled Sarah aside. "Something's wrong with that Paul guy," I whispered. "He's just scared, Alex, like all of us." "No, it's different. He looks sick." At that moment, Paul, standing in the middle of the group, let out a loud groan and clutched his stomach. All eyes turned to him. "Paul, what's wrong?" Jackson asked, taking a step toward him. "I don't know. My stomach." He gasped, doubling over. The doctor in the group, Dr. Aaron, stepped forward. "Let me take a look. Could be food poisoning. Have you taken Ionis?" "No!" Paul practically screamed, his eyes flashing wildly. "Never!" But it was a lie, and his body knew it. He screamed, but it was no longer a human scream. It was a shriek of unbearable agony that morphed into a bestial howl. He collapsed, his body beginning to convulse, and all of us, frozen in horror, witnessed the same nightmare I'd seen on the 15th floor. The crunch of bone, the tearing of skin, a fast, ugly, unnatural transformation. In a matter of seconds, where the nervous programmer Paul had been, a creature from our worst nightmares was writhing on the floor. The monster in sheep's clothing, the wolf among us. Time slowed to a thick, viscous syrup of horror. We watched as Paul's body broke and reformed with hideous speed. His screams became a low, gurgling snarl. The bones in his forearms elongated, bursting through the skin, his fingers stretching into black talons. His face pulled into a grotesque, wolf-like snout right before our eyes. He had taken Ionis, maybe just 1 pill, the day before the cataclysm. His system, perhaps weakened by some underlying illness, had fought a desperate, losing battle against the mutagen, delaying the inevitable. But the stress, the fear, the adrenaline, they were the catalyst. They had pulled the trigger. The monster that was once Paul scrambled to its feet. It was smaller than the Alpha, but in the confined space of the reading room it seemed enormous. For a second it stood there, its yellow eyes scanning the room full of people petrified with terror. It didn't see allies. It saw prey. "Get back!" Jackson roared, leveling the shotgun. But it was too late. The creature lunged at the nearest person, one of the college students. There was a short, choked scream and a wet, tearing sound. And then all hell broke loose. Panic detonated like a bomb. People screamed and scattered, tripping over tables and each other. The monster was in its element. It moved in a blur of speed, knocking people down, raking them with its claws. The reading room, a place of quiet knowledge, became a slaughterhouse. A deafening blast echoed through the room. Jackson had fired his shotgun at point-blank range. The buckshot slammed into the creature's shoulder, tearing out a chunk of flesh and fur. It howled in pain and fury, but it didn't stop it. If anything, it only enraged it. "Run for the exit! I'll hold it off!" Jackson yelled, working the pump on his shotgun. I grabbed Lily, pressing her face into my side so she couldn't see the carnage. "Sarah, with me!" We scrambled for the barricaded exit, toppling bookshelves to create a barrier. Behind us, there were screams, snarls, and another shotgun blast. The monster, ignoring the others, charged Jackson. The ex-Marine met it head-on, using his shotgun like a spear. But it was no contest. The creature swatted him aside, and they rolled across the floor in a deadly tangle. I saw a few of the other survivors trying to dismantle the barricade at the main entrance. It was taking too long. "This way!" Sarah shouted. She'd spotted something the others had missed. A large, tall window that looked out onto an inner library courtyard. It was boarded up, but it was our only chance. I passed Lily to her, and using the crowbar as a lever, began to tear at the boards with furious energy. The wood splintered. Behind me, I heard Jackson's final scream cut short by a sickening crunch. "Faster, Alex!" The last board gave way. I smashed the glass with the crowbar, sending shards showering outside. "Go!" I yelled. Sarah, clutching Lily, climbed through the frame and dropped to the ground. The courtyard was a few feet below. I was about to follow when I heard heavy footfalls behind me. The creature, covered in blood, its own and others, was turning toward me. It had finished with Jackson and was now seeking a new target. Our eyes met. Without thinking, I grabbed a heavy oak table and heaved it at the monster. It stumbled, giving me a precious second. I vaulted through the window, landing badly on my ankle. A sharp, searing pain shot up my leg, but I ignored it. I scrambled to my feet. "Run!" We sprinted across the inner courtyard toward a low brick wall. Behind us, the creature's silhouette appeared in the shattered window. It let out a frustrated, enraged howl, but didn't follow. Maybe the daylight, filtering through the clouds, was holding it back. We climbed the wall and found ourselves in a quiet alley. We ran, not stopping for several blocks until our lungs were on fire. I stopped, leaning against a wall, gasping for air. My ankle throbbed with pain. We had survived. Again. But the cost was horrific. Of the dozen people in the library, it was possible none had made it out. The lesson had been learned at a brutal price. You couldn't trust anyone. A monster could be hiding under the skin of anyone who smiled at you and said they were fine. In this new world, there were no safe havens. There were no allies. There was only the three of us. I looked at Sarah and Lily. Their faces were pale with shock. "We have to keep moving," I said, fighting through the pain. "The tower is close." In the distance, piercing the clouds, we could see the spire of Meridian Tower, our last, desperate hope. The pain in my ankle was a white-hot nail being driven into the bone with every step. I limped, leaning on Sarah's shoulder, as we navigated the labyrinth of alleys. We moved slowly, from shadow to shadow, constantly looking over our shoulders. The horror in the library had left its mark. Now every dark doorway, every abandoned car, seemed to hold a lethal threat. Meridian Tower loomed over us, a giant steel finger pointing at the gray sky. It was so close, yet it felt impossibly far. We had less than 2 hours until the evac time. The final alley opened onto the wide plaza in front of the tower, and there we froze. The plaza wasn't empty. It was littered with bodies and wreckage. In the center lay an overturned military truck, still smoking, and circling it like vultures was a pack. There were at least 24 of them. They were organized. They weren't moving chaotically, but like a disciplined combat unit, tearing apart what was left of the soldiers. It was confirmation of what Jackson had said. They had evolved. But that wasn't what made the blood freeze in my veins. Leading them was a single figure. an enormous, almost 9-foot-tall creature standing on the roof of the overturned truck, surveying its domain. It moved with the confidence of a warlord, and it limped on one leg. Across its elongated, wolf-like face, running from its eye to its jaw, was an ugly, ragged scar, a memento from its encounter with the shattered glass of the 15th floor. Marcus, the Alpha. He had survived. The fall from 150 feet hadn't killed him. It had slowed him, crippled him, but he had recovered. His monstrous regeneration, fueled by a double dose of Ionis, had saved him. I felt nausea rise in my throat. This wasn't just a monster. This was my personal demon, one I had a hand in creating, and he was here. He slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping the perimeter of the plaza, and it stopped on us, frozen in the mouth of the alley. For a second, everything was silent. I saw his yellow eyes narrow. There wasn't just bestial hunger in them. There was recognition and pure, concentrated hatred. He remembered me. He remembered who had sent him falling from the 15th floor. The Alpha drew himself up to his full, monstrous height and let out a howl. But it wasn't just a howl. It was a command. He raised a clawed hand and pointed directly at us. The entire pack, all 24 of them, turned as one to face us. Their snarls merged into a single deafening roar. This was no longer a random hunt for survivors. This was a vendetta. "Run to the tower!" I screamed, forgetting the pain in my ankle. Adrenaline slammed through my nervous system, killing the pain. We sprinted across the plaza. The ground trembled under the paws of the pack racing after us. I glanced back for a fraction of a second. They were fast. Terrifyingly fast. They ran like a pack of hounds, and leading them all, despite his limp, was the Alpha. His rage gave him strength. The revolving doors of Meridian Tower's main entrance were shattered. We flew inside, into the vast, marble-floored lobby. "We have to barricade it," Sarah yelled. But there was no time. The first creature burst into the lobby right behind us. I spun and swung the crowbar with all my might, connecting with its snout. There was a sickening crunch, and the monster went down with a yelp. But more were already coming through. "To the stairs!" I shouted. The elevators were dead. Our only way was up, to the roof. We dashed for the stairwell, and I slammed the heavy steel door shut just as something massive crashed against it from the other side. The door shuddered, the hinges groaning in protest. We began to climb. 70 floors of fear. Behind the door, we could hear furious roars and the scrape of claws. They were trying to break through. I knew that door wouldn't hold for long. We ran up the concrete steps, me limping and gasping for air. Sarah pulling a stumbling Lily along behind her. I can't do it anymore," the little girl cried. "Yes, you can," I snarled, surprised at my own cruelty. "You have to. Think about your brother." It worked. She fell silent and ran faster. We passed the 10th floor, the 20th. My lungs were on fire. My legs felt like lead weights. Below, there was a deafening crash. They had broken down the door. The thunder of their claws on the concrete began to echo up the stairwell. They were coming for us, and I could hear one sound that stood out from the rest. The commanding, furious roar of the Alpha. He wasn't just chasing us. He was leading the hunt, and he wasn't going to let his prey escape a second time. The climb up the stairs became a surreal, monotonous nightmare. Left foot, right foot, inhale, exhale. The stairwell walls were a uniform, drab gray. The only thing that changed were the numbers on the doors of the floors we passed. 30, 35, 40. My lungs burned. Every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. My ankle was a solid knot of pain, but I had stopped noticing it. Adrenaline was doing its job. Sarah ran ahead holding Lily's hand. Her breathing was heavy and ragged, but she didn't slow down. She was stronger than I'd thought, stronger than she'd thought. And from below, the sound rose. A continuous, multi-voiced thunder of claws on concrete. It grew louder, closer. It was the sound of our death closing in. Occasionally, it was punctuated by the Alpha's furious, commanding roar. That sound drove us onward better than any whip. It fueled our fear, keeping it from becoming a paralyzing terror. On the 45th floor, the stairwell door was wide open. We were running past when one of the creatures leaped out from the office space, trying to cut us off. It must have taken another elevator or staircase. I didn't have time to react, but Sarah did. Without hesitating, she shoved an empty metal janitor's cart that was sitting against the wall. The cart crashed into the monster's legs. It stumbled and fell, giving us a few precious seconds. We scrambled past. "Don't stop!" I yelled. The 55th floor. The 60th. The city below had become an abstract map of lights and shadows. We were so high, so close to salvation. Suddenly, the rumbling from below changed. It grew louder, punctuated by the sounds of splintering concrete. I realized what was happening. They weren't just running. They were smashing their way through the floors. The strongest among them were punching through the ceilings to cut corners. They were smart, and they were desperate. On the 65th floor, our path was blocked. The stairwell door was barricaded from the inside with a pile of office furniture. A trap. "Damn it!" I gasped, throwing my weight against the blockage. It wouldn't budge. The thundering from below was much closer now, maybe 2 or 3 floors away. "This way," Sarah shouted, pointing to the door leading into the floor. We burst into a huge, empty office space. It was under renovation. Rolls of carpet, ladders, and tools were scattered everywhere. "Find another stairwell, now!" We ran across the entire floor. At the far end was another door. I yanked it open. We were back in a stairwell. But the sound of pursuit was now coming not only from below, but from the side, from the corridor we just left. They were boxing us in. The 68th floor, 69th, 70th, the last door. It was stenciled with one word: roof. I threw my weight against the push bar. It didn't give. Locked. No, 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 no. I hammered my fist against the door, feeling despair close in around me. The sound of claws was on the landing just below us. Sarah pushed me aside. "The crowbar!" she yelled. I handed her the heavy steel tool. She jammed it into the gap between the door and the frame and heaved with all her strength. There was a crack. She heaved again. With a deafening screech of tortured metal, the lock gave way. We tumbled out onto the roof, and straight into a roaring wind and a deafening thrum. Hovering above us just 100 feet up was a helicopter, a Black Hawk. Its searchlights cut through the darkness, illuminating our rooftop perch. It was hope. Real, tangible hope. But when I looked at the edge of the roof, that hope turned to primal terror. They were climbing the walls. Like giant, nightmarish spiders, they were scaling the sheer face of the skyscraper, their claws finding purchase on ledges, windows, and decorative panels. There were dozens of them. And leading the charge, moving with an unnatural speed and grace, was him, the Alpha. His yellow eyes burned in the searchlight's beam, focused on me. From the helicopter, a rope ladder was thrown down. It swayed in the wind just 20 feet from us. It was a race, a final desperate sprint. And I wasn't sure we were going to win. The roof became the stage for the final act of our nightmare. The roaring wind tried to knock us off our feet. The deafening thrum of the Black Hawk's blades mixed with the multi-voiced snarl of the pack scaling the walls. "Sarah, take Lily and climb, now!" I yelled, my voice lost in the noise. She nodded, grabbed the girl, and scrambled for the swaying rope ladder. I turned to face the edge of the roof, crowbar held out in front of me. A useless weapon against such a horde, but I had to buy them a few seconds. The first creature heaved itself over the parapet. I swung the crowbar with all my strength, cracking it across the face. It shrieked and fell away, but 3 more were climbing up right behind it. At that moment, thunder split the sky, but it wasn't thunder. It was a sound I'd never heard live before. The short, violent burst of a heavy machine gun. Brrrt! A gunner was firing from the open door of the helicopter. Hot brass rained down. The bullets chipped chunks from the concrete parapet, shredding a few of the monsters trying to gain the roof. It gave us a chance. The gunner couldn't hit them all, but he was creating a kill zone that made the pack hesitate for a crucial moment. "Climb!" I screamed again, seeing Sarah and Lily were already on the ladder. I backed away toward them, swinging the crowbar at any creature that broke through. One of them raked its claws across my shoulder. Sharp pain flared, but I ignored it. Sarah and Lily were halfway to the chopper. It was my turn. I spun and lunged for the ladder. My hands closed around a rope rung, and my feet left the roof. I was safe, and in that instant, the Alpha launched himself onto the roof in one giant, powerful leap. He ignored the machine gun fire that tore through the air next to him. He ignored everything. His world had narrowed to a single target. Me. He charged forward, making an impossible leap from the edge of the roof, directly at me. I could see his open maw, his eyes burning with hatred. Time stretched again. I desperately tried to pull my legs up. His claws scraped inches from my boot. I felt the wind from his passage, smelled his hot, foul breath. He had missed. With a roar of pure fury, he plummeted into the darkness between the skyscrapers, but I knew he would survive this too. Things like him didn't die that easily. The ladder was being winched up. I was hauled into the chopper's cabin. The door slammed shut behind us, cutting off the roar of the wind and the snarls of the creatures left on the roof. Inside, it was sterile and quiet. We were met by 2 soldiers in full combat gear and hazmat suits. Their faces were hidden behind helmet visors. No words of welcome, no questions about whether we were okay. Just cold professionalism. One of them pointed a device that looked like a futuristic pistol at Sarah. A low hum sounded. "Subject 1, clear," he said in a flat, mechanical voice. He aimed the scanner at Lily, who was huddled against Sarah. "Subject 2, clear." Then he turned it on me. I stared at him, breathing heavily, feeling the blood from the wound on my shoulder soaking through my jacket. "Subject 3, clear." The soldier nodded to his partner. DARPA's prototype detector works. They weren't kidding when they said they fast-tracked it after the Ionis side effect rumors. The irony. Only then did the second soldier offer us a first aid kit. The helicopter banked, carrying us away from the hell that Chicago had become. I crawled to a window and looked down. Meridian Tower was receding. But I managed to see something on the roof. A lone, dark figure stood there. The Alpha. He couldn't reach us. He had lost this battle. But he stood there, head tilted back, staring straight at our helicopter. And even through the drone of the engines, I thought I could hear his silent howl. It wasn't a howl of defeat. It was a howl of hatred and of promise. I turned away from the window. We were saved. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the end of the first chapter. My personal war with Marcus Vance had just been declared, and it would be fought until one of us was well and truly dead. An almost reverent silence reigned in the cabin of the Black Hawk, broken only by the steady drone of the engines. After the cacophony of the last few days, the quiet was oppressive, making my ears ring. I sat on a cold metal bench while Sarah, using the first aid kit, clumsily but carefully dressed my shoulder. Lily was asleep on her lap, her small face almost serene in slumber. The soldiers in their hazmat suits didn't speak to us. They sat opposite, weapons resting on their knees, their helmeted gazes fixed on nothing. We weren't survivors who had been rescued. We were cargo, evidence, prototype detector. I was still replaying the soldiers' words, so they knew. Or they had suspected. Someone in the government hadn't trusted Prometheus Corp and its miracle drug, and now their worst fears had been realized. I looked out the window. Chicago was spread out beneath us like a sick, dying animal. Pockets of fire burned like open sores. The streets were empty and dark. The city of light had become a kingdom of shadows. I thought about the millions of people who had taken Ionis, about my parents on their hike along the Appalachian Trail. Had they become one of them? Or was the mutation only triggered by that fortified batch from our building? And if so, what would happen when the regular Ionis built up in their systems to a critical mass? There were more questions than answers. I looked down again. The city was disappearing into the haze, but I could still see it. I could see the roof of Meridian Tower, and I could see him. The Alpha, Marcus. He stood there in my memory watching me go. In this new world, born from the lie of eternal youth, survival was just the first step. The real fight was the battle to remain human, to not let the horror and the hatred turn you into a beast, even if you didn't have fangs and claws. I looked at Sarah, who was stroking Lily's hair, at this little girl who had lost everything but could still find it in her to smile. They were my anchor, my reason not to break. The war wasn't over. For the world, it was probably just beginning. But my personal war had a face, and I knew that one day he and I would meet again, and next time, neither of us would have the luxury of missing.